I initially thought covering 2022's Soulstice would be something of a challenge for me. For starters, it would be the first game I talk about that I hadn't played before setting out to make a video, but also because it seemed to be more mechanically focused than other games I've talked about. Character action games are often heavily focused on the moment-to-moment gameplay, with plots being something simply to string the action together. That's not to say there aren't good narratives within these genres, but it is often not the focus. I find it far easier to talk about narrative, characters and art than I do mechanics, since while I obviously care about and enjoy gameplay, I find the context for that gameplay far more compelling in the long run. I was surprised then to find that Italian developer Reply Game Studios had created a game that was not only enjoyable for its mechanical complexity, but also featured a dense and character-focused narrative that I ended up getting really into. Soulstice features a great deal of backstory, though it's mainly relegated to a quick exposition dump at the beginning. Long ago, three gods known as the Keepers fought, banished, and sealed chaos beyond the Veil. Then, using the power of chaos, they created life, including humanity. Chaos would again breach the Veil and wound the Keepers in an event known as the Soulstice of Souls. To combat this, humanity would use the power of chaos to create the Chimera to defeat the forces of chaos and reseal the Veil. Following this, they built 3 holy cities, each dedicated to one of the Keepers, on the 3 points of incursion into the world. The Chimera are a force of warriors working under the Order of the Ashen Blade. They are formed of 2 souls, one living, one dead, linked by chaos into a single body. The living body is given enhanced strength and speed, as well as the ability to heal quickly. Meanwhile, the dead shade, attached to the body, can sense beyond the veil and provide support in combat. You play as one of these Chimera, a joining of 2 sisters, Briar and Lute, as they enter the city of Ilden to close a tear in the veil that has opened at the centre of the city and left it in ruins. Soulstice can be a little on the easy side as far as character action games go. I wouldn't consider this a point against it, mind you. It never feels particularly satisfying to just about muddle through a game, so Soulstice being a little easier helps you get more into the combat mechanics and experiment, rather than getting bogged down just trying to make it through. That said, as more enemy types are introduced and fights become larger, the difficulty does ramp up to a satisfying challenge by the end. As the living body of your Chimera, Briar takes the lead in most of the combat, and much of the controls focused on her. Meanwhile, Lute acts in a more supportive role, firing off projectiles at will while also providing the parry and field mechanics. Unlike similar games, the parry in Soulstice acts more like it does in Batman Arkham or the Lord of the Rings Shadow of games. Not every enemy attack can be parried, and there's a short cooldown too, so you still have to avoid damage through dodges and carefully timing combos, but otherwise if you hit the parry button during the relatively generous window in which the prompt appears, Lute will stop the enemy's attack without interrupting Briar's current action. Lute's other role is the field mechanic. There are 3 major enemy types throughout the game: Corrupted, Wraiths, and Possessed. While Corrupted can be attacked normally, Wraiths and Possessed are immune to Briar's attacks unless Lute is projecting the correct field. Lute can only hold the fields for a short time. Holding it too long will cause Lute to dematerialise for a short while, leaving Briar defenceless and on the back foot until she returns. Switching fields to attack the correct enemy, as well as switching weapons to those most appropriate for the type of enemy, makes up the majority of the more technical aspects of combat. The slightly prescriptive nature of combat can be disappointing, with many of the enemies having specific optimal strategies to defeat, but there's enough variety throughout that it's not a huge issue, and in fact switching between the 6 different secondary weapons you have access to can be a little overwhelming at times, so it's good that the suboptimal strategies are also viable. There's a separate skill tree for each sister. Briar's is simpler, a straight list of new moves and damage upgrades for her secondary weapons, the only disappointment being that her primary weapon, the Greatsword, only has 2 additional moves for it. Lute's tree, on the other hand, is a sprawling, non-linear mass of skills that grows over the course of the game. This allows you to specialise in various areas of combat, and being able to refund Lute's skills freely lets you experiment and find a combat approach that best fits you on your trek through Ilden. The city of Ilden is gorgeously rendered throughout. While in its ruined state much of it is destroyed and burning, and corpses litter the street, you still get a sense of how grand and impressive it must have once been. The ramshackle warren of medieval houses that make up the docks and Low City eventually give way to the opulent Gothic architecture of the High City and the Grand Monastery. As you progress closer to the source of the tear, the cathedral at the highest point in the city, the tear starts to affect reality more and more. This starts out with a massive temperature drop, covering much of the inner city in snow and ice, but by the time you reach the cathedral, reality itself has begun to shatter as the world beyond the veil starts to break through. Throughout, the city is framed by a fixed camera. Fixed camera angles have always been a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it means the game can compose every environment beautifully, fully conveying the scale of the city around you and drawing your attention to specific elements of it. Of course, on the other hand, this can make navigating and especially platforming sequences somewhat difficult. I never found it too confusing, but there were several situations throughout where I had to take a few shots at a jump because I couldn't quite make out the placement of the platforms. You're usually given full camera control during the combat encounters, fortunately. I understand fixed camera angles aren't to everyone's tastes, but here they're used well enough that I do think the game would have been weaker if the player was given full control of it. While your main goal is to reach the tear at the centre of the city and seal it, the plot isn't nearly as straightforward as that. It takes on the guise of a detective story. Throughout the plot, Briar and Lute gradually piece together what caused the tear in the first place, and what happened to the chimeras that were sent before you. They were supposed to wait to meet you on arrival, but the sisters are something of an outcast amongst the Ashen Blade due to Briar's corrupted blood. When chaos seeps into the world, it corrupts people, losing control of themselves and becoming violent monsters. This is what happened to Briar before the events of the game. She became corrupted during an attack on her village, but her connection to Lute seemed to slow the spread in her. She managed to retain some semblance of her humanity while near her. Not enough to stop her from mortally wounding Lute, unfortunately, but when the Grand Master of the Order, Lord Dougal, discovered their connection was limiting the spread of corruption in Briar, he ordered them turned into a chimera. While this did stabilise Briar and bring her back to her senses, her corruption still makes her an outcast amongst the other members of the Order. She feels a great deal of guilt, both for surviving the attack on her village at all, and for being the cause of Lute's death. This survivor's guilt has resulted in Briar being reckless, quick to anger and somewhat volatile. Lute is far less perturbed by events, however. She's less confident, less sure of herself, but is also more compassionate and represents the voice of reason. She's also shown to be a much firmer believer in the church than Briar. The two are relatively common archetypes on the surface, but there's depth that builds throughout the story, and their bond does seem genuine by the end of things. The writing throughout Soulstice is very good, but with Briar and Lute especially, it's helped by the voice work. Both characters are voiced by Stephanie Houston, previously better known for voicing, mocapping and being the model of Quiet in Metal Gear Solid 5. As Quiet, she had the unusual position where she provided the voice performance for both the English and Japanese voiceovers of the game, but her dual role in Soulstice is even more impressive. You wouldn't tell the sisters had the same voice actress just by listening to them, and Houston provides both with distinct and clear personalities that really elevates the characters even beyond the solid writing and engaging plot. The remaining cast of characters is small, but it suits the narrative well. The most prominent is Layton. Layton is an observer, basically a handler for chimeras sent to advise and provide intel, as well as report back to the Order at the end of a mission. He acts as a place to access the shop and advance skills during missions, as well as granting you weapons throughout the game and providing guidance and background lore through conversation. Initially, there is some animosity between Layton and the sisters, but as the game progresses, he starts to reveal his secrets and trust the sisters more, and by the end of the game, he is their staunchest ally. Layton is initially suspicious of Briar and Lute's competence, and is himself a suspicious character with his own secrets, but one of these is that he's often as much in the dark as Briar and Lute are. He puts on a front of being knowledgeable, but it becomes clear that he's been sent to Ilden without a full picture of what's going on, and is trying to cover up the fact that he too is somewhat out of his depth. He's meant to be the observer for the other two chimeras sent in before you as well, but he hasn't seen either of them. You also don't see either of them in person, though they appear in echoes that Lute can uncover. Following their path through the city to discover what happened to them is one of the many mysteries driving the plot. It's a shame you don't get a great deal of time with either of them. Briar and Lute being something of an outcast means that you don't get a great idea of what a normal chimera is like, though you get something of an idea from these small glimpses of the two pairs. Jared and Jaden are brothers. They volunteered to become chimera through their lust for combat. They're pretty straightforward, they love a good fight, and fighting for the Order gets them that. Armina and Demian, on the other hand, are far more complicated. While Chimera need a strong bond between the two souls that make them, that doesn't necessarily need to be a positive bond. Armina and Demian fucking hate each other. Demian was a brutal serial killer in life, while Armina spent years chasing him to bring him to justice. When she finally did, Lord Dougal ordered them turned into a chimera. Armina struggles to keep complete control over her shade. Only through her strong will and Demian's love of violence does she succeed, though she has to be constantly wary. The final major player is Donovan, another chimera but quite unlike the others. He is one of the strongest chimera, which is all the more impressive since he relies solely on his own strength and doesn't ever use the powers of his shade, instead keeping it suppressed. For this reason he is known as the Shadeless, because no one knows the identity of his shade. When you meet him early on, it appears he's been sent in as reinforcements, but it quickly becomes apparent that that isn't the case, and he knows a lot more about what's going on than he's admitting to. He takes on the role of your mirror throughout much of the game. You fight him several times and he has a moveset similar to Briar's, making for some good boss fights, but he is still helpful and supportive, pushing the sisters to improve and survive the challenges to come. He's hiding a lot, but he's never portrayed as a villain. While Leighton is initially suspicious but turns out to be trustworthy, Donovan seems trustworthy, but eventually is revealed to be far more involved with events than anyone realises. Usually fighting Donovan is due to Briar's corruption. She can call on this corruption to become even more powerful, but it's dangerous to do so, potentially losing herself to it. This comes in the form of a powerful but limited ability. When you manage to string together combos and parries without being hit, you can briefly enter what is known as Rapture mode. Attacks become larger and more damaging, as well as affecting all enemies without needing to have loot's fields activated. But if you activate Rapture mode while Briar's health is too low, there's a chance she instead goes berserk. She becomes even more powerful, but you completely lose control of her, instead having to complete a series of quick-time events for loot to pull her back to her senses or risk death. Deliberately trying to push Briar into this berserk mode is a very risky move, but it can be just the thing to get you out of a tight spot, and it's impressive that the dev team managed to systematise this narrative element. While this affliction is unique to Briar and Loot, there's something similar that can happen to all Chimera, called Transcendence. Drawing power from chaos is about as risky as it sounds, and the more power a Chimera draws, the more likely they are to transcend. Drawing too much power, the Chimera and its shade merge into a powerful and monstrous form unique to the pair. Normally this form is wildly unstable and can't be maintained for long before the Transcended falls apart and destabilises, but with the tear in Ilden nearby, Transcended are able to maintain their form, meaning you get to fight both Chimera sent ahead of you as major boss fights. Jared and Jaden are still united, two halves of a giant head speaking as one, but still independent. Armina, on the other hand, thinks her Transcendence has eliminated Demian, but it hasn't. As she weakens during her boss fight, he reveals himself, taking over her body to fight you instead. Throughout the boss fight they continue to vie for control of the body, eventually killing themselves in their hatred for one another. Donovan's transcension, on the other hand, is the reason for the tear in the first place. Everyone who was sent to Ilden was deliberately sent to die. This was a suicide mission from the start, with Lord Dougal pulling the strings. Exactly why Dougal wants to create the tear above Ilden and later above the other two holy cities is unclear. In fact, during a post-credits stinger he is asked why he's done this by Leighton, and Dougal basically replies with "shut up, you wouldn't understand," which is one of the only major threads left dangling by the plot. My guess is that since during the first Solstice of Souls the Chimera were created to battle chaos, Dougal is hoping that by recreating these conditions he can further the Order's power and come out of the apocalypse in complete control of the Church, but this is never clearly stated, so his exact reasoning remains a mystery. While the other two Chimera were likely just collateral damage, Briar and Loot were sent because Dougal saw them as a failed experiment. In addition, it's revealed that Briar's memories are false. Loot was mortally wounded by soldiers sent to clear her village of corrupted. A corrupted Briar attempted to defend her, and that's why Dougal had them turned into Chimera. The guilt Briar feels for being the cause of Loot's death is entirely manufactured to control her, which is a hell of a twist. Guilt is a tricky thing in real life. It can be good, acting as a function of empathy, stopping you from harming others by making you feel guilty when you wrong someone. But just as often it can be destructive. For example, if someone feels guilty for something that isn't actually wrong, like being gay. It's not unheard of for people to manufacture and use guilt as a method of control. Abusers, cult leaders, and occasionally even religious leaders have all at times done this, and the inclusion here is a powerful plot point. Briar's absolute fury when the truth is revealed is a suitable response and forms a good driving force for the back of the narrative. Layton was sent as your observer because he was a spy. He was originally a monk from another branch of the church, but as they got wind of that Dougal may be plotting something, he was sent to join the Order as an observer. It was Layton that revealed to Donovan what Dougal was plotting, causing Donovan to confront him. During this confrontation, Donovan was forced to the very edge of transcending, and Dougal captured him and had him sent to Eldon to finish the process. It was Donovan transcending that caused the tear and kicked off the events of the game. Donovan is unusual in that he can revert to his human form even after he has transcended. This is because in his human form he is in full control, but as a transcended he completely loses control of himself to his shade, only returning to human form when he can wrest control back from her. Donovan's shade is his own daughter. While Donovan was a captain of the guard, his wife fell ill and died. His daughter Hannah was struck with the same illness, and at her deathbed Dougal arrived and offered to turn the two of them into Chimera. Donovan accepted against his daughter's wishes out of fear of losing her, but whatever afflicted her before still causes her suffering as a shade. She was in constant pain, and this pain, alongside the anger at what was done to her, resulted in her lashing out uncontrollably. Donovan suppressed her completely to prevent the pain and stop her from hurting others, but in their transcended form, Hannah is in full control. She's actually a pretty sympathetic villain. She's suffered a great deal due to the decisions she never had a hand in, and the manipulation of Dougal, just like Briar and Lute. But she's filled with such anger at what has been done to her that she's trying to end the world, even though she's still being manipulated to do exactly what Dougal wanted her to. So, sympathetic or not, you do still have to fight her in order to thwart Dougal's plans. Of course, the only way to combat this is for Briar and Lute to transcend themselves, which takes the form of an even stronger power-up in the late game. Like Donovan, and like Briar's Rapture state, they are still able to walk back this transformation, so it's only a temporary ability. They are, however, unique in one respect. All the other Transcended are clearly two different people in a single body. Jared and Jaden work together, Armina and Demian fight for control, while Hannah completely subjugates her father. But Briar and Lute fuse perfectly with one another into a single being. Ultimately, to defeat Hannah and seal the tear, they have to push themselves far enough to permanently transcend. It leaves the game in a slightly tricky place, actually. It's clearly leaving space open for a sequel. The tear is sealed, and Layton agrees to help the newly transcended sisters in stopping Lord Dougal once and for all, but Dougal does succeed in opening tears in the other two holy cities, raising the stakes for a sequel. A fully transcended Briar and Lute seems far too powerful to play as, even with the larger threat. Leaving things as they are is a fine option though. Soulstice is a perfectly satisfying story on its own, but it will be interesting to see where things will go if Reply Game Studios do make a sequel. Soulstice is a real hidden gem in my opinion. Its mechanical complexity and gameplay encounters were enjoyable, yes, but I was surprised to find such a dense and engaging narrative following such complex characters in the midst of it. It's a shame it got such moderate reviews and relatively little coverage overall. I think it was hindered by some outdated sensibilities here and there, given the fixed camera angles, but overall it's a solid, narratively complex character action game that's well worth checking out. I hope Reply Game Studios gets to continue working in future. The studio is a branch of the Reply Group, an Italian conglomerate covering multiple technical industries, and with Soulstice not being a huge hit, it's difficult to tell whether they will continue to operate. Which is unfortunate, since besides Soulstice, their backlog, though limited, is interesting, consisting of a third-person VR game about Theseus in the Minotaur's Labyrinth, and a combination choose-your-own-adventure and turn-based RPG based on Joe Denver's Lone Wolf game books. I'd love to see a sequel to Soulstice, but I'd be equally interested in seeing whatever the studio decides to put out next, since they seem to be in a position where they have both the skill to make great games and the budget to make larger games, while still being small enough to be free to experiment and try new things. Hopefully we'll be seeing more from them in future, since this level of development, larger than indie but not as large as AAA, the so-called AA space, is underrepresented but has a great deal of potential, as was realised with Soulstice. Thanks for watching.
It was justified. I hate being right. Let's get rid of the mask.